The wind moved slowly across the fields of northern Texas, carrying with it the quiet sounds of the countryside. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and fading orange. Daniel Carter stood on the wooden porch of his farmhouse, holding a warm mug of coffee in his rough, weathered hands. Years of hard work had shaped those hands. They were the hands of a man who had built a life from the land. Behind the house stretched hundreds of acres of pasture, rolling fields, fences that disappeared into the distance, and the familiar sound of cattle shifting lazily in the evening. At the far end of the property sat the corral, surrounded by wooden rails worn smooth by decades of use. Daniel had spent most of his life there, but lately something had changed. Inside the house, the kitchen light flickered softly as his wife, Emily, moved around, preparing dinner. She hummed quietly to herself, the same way she had for the last 15 years. Emily Carter was the calm center of Daniel's world. She had been there through droughts, failed harvests, broken equipment, and long winters that seemed like they would never end. She had always been honest with him, always. But for the past few weeks, Daniel had started noticing something strange. Every night after dinner, Emily disappeared. At first, he thought nothing of it. A walk after dinner wasn't unusual. But one evening, while fixing a loose hinge on the back gate, Daniel noticed something that made him pause. Emily wasn't walking toward the road. She was walking toward the corral. The moon had been bright that night, and her silhouette moved quietly across the pasture grass. She walked slowly, carefully, almost like she didn't want anyone to see her. Daniel watched from the shadows near the barn. She reached the corral gate, paused for a moment, and then slipped inside. The cattle barely moved. They seemed used to her presence. Daniel waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Emily finally walked back toward the house. Her face looked different somehow. Not guilty, not scared, just thoughtful. The next night, it happened again. Dinner, dishes. Then Emily quietly slipped out the back door. Again, she walked straight to the corral. Daniel's mind began to fill with questions. Why was she going there? And why every night? For several days, he told himself it was nothing. Maybe she was checking the cattle. Maybe she just needed quiet time. But something deep in his gut told him there was more to it. One night, Daniel decided to follow her. He waited until she had walked halfway across the pasture before leaving the porch. The grass was cool under his boots as he moved carefully through the darkness. He stopped behind a large oak tree near the corral. From there, he could see everything. Emily stepped inside the corral. She closed the gate behind her. The cows shifted gently in the moonlight. Then she did something Daniel did not expect. She sat down on the wooden fence rail, and she just looked at them. Minutes passed. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched the cattle quietly breathing in the cool night air. Then something even stranger happened. Emily began to cry, not loudly, just silent tears. Daniel's heart tightened in his chest. He had never seen her like that. After a few minutes, she wiped her eyes and stood up. Then she walked slowly back toward the house. Daniel stayed hidden until she disappeared inside. That night, he barely slept. His mind raced with possibilities. Was she unhappy? Was something wrong? Was she hiding something from him? Days passed, and the nightly trips continued. Daniel tried asking her casually during breakfast one morning. "Everything all right with the cattle?" he asked. Emily smiled. "The cattle?" she said. "Yeah, they're fine." Her answer was too quick, too simple. Something wasn't right. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who liked secrets. And the thought that Emily might be hiding something from him began to eat at him slowly. Finally, one afternoon while repairing a fence post, Daniel made a decision. If Emily wasn't going to tell him what was happening, he would find out himself. The next day, he drove into town and stopped at a small hardware store. After browsing for a few minutes, he walked out with a small box in his hand. Inside the box was a motion-activated camera, the kind hunters used to watch wildlife. That night, while Emily was inside finishing dinner, Daniel quietly walked out to the corral. The evening air smelled like hay and dust. He climbed up one of the fence posts and carefully mounted the camera facing the center of the corral. From that angle, it would capture everything. Daniel climbed down and brushed the dirt from his hands. He stared at the small camera for a moment. Part of him felt guilty, but another part of him needed to know the truth, because whatever Emily was doing out there every night, it clearly meant something to her. And Daniel had a feeling that the camera was about to reveal a secret he never expected. The next morning, Daniel woke up before the sun. That wasn't unusual for a rancher, but this time it wasn't the cattle or the fences that were on his mind. It was the camera. He sat at the kitchen table staring at his coffee, while the sky slowly brightened outside the window. Emily moved around the kitchen quietly, making breakfast like she always did. Eggs, toast, coffee. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Daniel watched her for a moment. She looked peaceful, calm, almost as if nothing unusual had been happening at all. When she noticed him looking, she smiled. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Daniel replied. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence. But inside Daniel's mind, the questions continued to grow. After breakfast, Emily left to run some errands in town. The moment her truck disappeared down the dirt road, Daniel stood up. His heart began beating faster. He walked to the living room, where an old laptop sat on a wooden desk. The small trail camera he had installed the night before automatically saved recordings to a memory card. Daniel had taken the card early that morning before Emily woke up. Now it sat on the table in front of him. For a moment, he just stared at it. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Part of him hoped the camera had captured nothing at all, because if it had, it meant Emily truly was hiding something. He inserted the memory card into the laptop. The screen lit up. A folder appeared. Inside were several short video files, each one marked with the time they were recorded. Daniel clicked the first video. The screen showed the corral at night. The image was slightly grainy from the low light, but everything was visible. The wooden fences, the cattle moving slowly, the quiet open field beyond. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, movement. The corral gate slowly opened. Emily stepped inside. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. His chest tightened. There she was, just like every night. She closed the gate behind her and walked slowly toward the center of the corral. The cows barely reacted. They simply shifted slightly, as if they were used to her being there. Emily stopped near the fence, and just like Daniel had seen before, she sat down. For a long moment, she simply watched the cattle. The wind brushed gently across her hair. The animals breathed quietly in the cool night air. Daniel frowned. "What are you doing, Em?" he whispered to himself. Minutes passed. Nothing unusual. Just Emily sitting quietly in the corral. Then suddenly, Emily stood up. She walked toward one of the cows, a large brown cow standing near the fence. The animal slowly turned its head toward her. Emily gently placed her hand on the cow's neck. She closed her eyes. Daniel felt something strange in his chest as he watched. It looked emotional, almost like she was saying goodbye. Then something happened that Daniel had never seen before. Emily began speaking. The camera didn't record sound clearly from that distance, but he could see her lips moving. She was talking to the cow. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. Her shoulders trembled slightly. She wiped her eyes. She was crying again. Daniel sat back in his chair, confused. Why would she be crying in the corral? He wondered. He opened the second video. Another night. Same time. Same scene. Emily walking quietly into the corral. Again, she sat down. Again, she watched the cattle. Again, she cried. But this time, something different happened. She reached into her coat pocket. Daniel leaned forward again. Emily pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. She held it in her hands and looked at it for several seconds. Then she looked up at the cattle and slowly began speaking again. Longer this time, much longer. Her body language was full of emotion. Daniel could see her shoulders shaking as she spoke. Finally, she folded the paper again and placed it back in her pocket. Then she rested her head gently against the wooden fence. Daniel paused the video. His mind raced. What was on that paper? Why was she talking to the cattle every night? And why did it look like she was saying goodbye? Something inside him felt uneasy. Emily had never behaved like this before. Not in 15 years. Daniel opened the third video. This one had been recorded later in the night. The corral looked darker now. The moon had moved behind thin clouds. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the gate opened again. Emily stepped inside, but this time she walked directly toward the same brown cow. The cow moved closer to her, almost like it recognized her. Daniel watched closely. Emily placed both hands on the cow's face, and then she hugged the animal, not casually, not playfully. She held it tightly and began crying harder than before. Daniel felt a knot forming in his stomach. Something was very wrong, but he still didn't understand what. Emily finally stepped back. She wiped her face and looked up at the sky for a moment. Then she spoke again, long sentences, slowly, emotionally, and once again, Daniel could see tears. After a few minutes, she walked toward the gate. But before leaving the corral, she turned around one last time and whispered something. The camera barely caught the movement of her lips, but Daniel could almost read the words. He paused the video and leaned closer. His eyes narrowed. Emily's lips moved slowly, and it looked like she said 3 simple words. "Thank you for everything." Daniel sat there in silence, his heart beating harder now, because the more he watched the recordings, the more it looked like Emily was saying goodbye. But goodbye to what? To the cattle? To the ranch? Or to something much bigger? Daniel closed the laptop slowly. Outside, the wind moved across the open fields. The cattle shifted quietly in the distance. For the first time in his life, Daniel Carter felt something he rarely felt: fear. Because deep down, he had the strange feeling that whatever Emily was hiding was about to change their lives forever. Daniel spent the rest of the day trying to work, but his mind refused to focus. The fence he was repairing took 3 times longer than it should have. Twice he hammered his thumb by mistake. His thoughts kept returning to the same image: Emily crying in the corral, talking to the cattle, holding that brown cow like it meant something deeply personal. None of it made sense. Emily had always loved the ranch, but this was different. This looked like grief, like someone preparing to say goodbye. Late that afternoon, the Texas sun hung low in the sky as Daniel finished feeding the cattle. The same brown cow stood near the fence, the one Emily had hugged. Daniel walked closer. The animal lifted its head slowly and looked at him with calm, dark eyes. He placed his hand on the wooden rail and studied the cow for a moment. "What's so special about you?" he muttered quietly. The cow simply chewed its hay, peaceful, unaware of the strange mystery surrounding it. Daniel sighed and turned back toward the house. Inside, Emily was already preparing dinner. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen. She looked up and smiled when he entered. "You're late," she said gently. "Fence needed fixing," Daniel replied. They sat down at the table, the same routine they had followed for years. But tonight, Daniel studied her more closely. Her eyes looked tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired, like someone carrying a weight they didn't want others to see. Halfway through dinner, he finally spoke. "Emily." She looked up. "Yes?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to accuse her, but he needed answers. "I noticed you've been walking out to the corral a lot lately." For a brief moment, Emily froze. It was subtle, but Daniel saw it. Her hand stopped moving. Her eyes shifted slightly toward the window. Then she forced a small smile. "Oh, that. Yes," Daniel said calmly. "That." She took a sip of water. "Just checking on the cattle," she said. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. "At night?" Emily shrugged softly. "Sometimes the quiet helps me think." Daniel nodded slowly, but he knew she wasn't telling the full truth. He had seen the videos, seen the tears, seen the way she hugged that cow. None of that looked like someone simply checking the cattle. Still, he didn't push further. Not yet. Dinner ended quietly. Afterward, Emily washed the dishes, while Daniel sat in the living room pretending to read an old ranch magazine. But he wasn't reading. He was waiting. About 30 minutes later, the back door opened. Daniel looked up slowly. Emily stepped outside, just like every other night. He waited a few seconds, then quietly stood up and followed. The air outside was cool. Crickets filled the silence of the countryside. And ahead of him, Emily walked once again toward the corral. Daniel stayed further back this time. He didn't want her to notice him. When she reached the corral gate, she paused for a moment, just like before. Then she stepped inside. Daniel stopped near the same oak tree he had used for cover the first night. The moon hung high in the sky now, casting silver light across the pasture. Inside the corral, the cattle shifted lazily. Emily walked slowly toward the brown cow again. The animal moved toward her almost immediately. Daniel watched carefully. Something about that connection seemed unusual. Emily placed her hand on the cow's neck. Then she leaned her forehead against it. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the tears. She began speaking again. Her voice was soft, carried gently by the night breeze. This time, Daniel could hear a few words. Not much time left. Daniel's stomach tightened. Not much time. What did that mean? Emily continued speaking quietly. I wish things were different. You deserve better. Daniel felt a cold chill run through him. None of this sounded normal. None of this sounded like someone talking about cattle. Then Emily reached into her pocket again. The same folded paper. She opened it slowly. Under the moonlight, she read from it quietly. Daniel couldn't hear the words clearly, but he could see the emotion in every movement. Tears rolled down her face again. She finished reading, folded the paper carefully. Then she hugged the cow once more. This time longer, much longer. And Daniel noticed something else. The cow didn't move away. It simply stood there quietly, almost like it understood. Finally, Emily stepped back. She wiped her face and looked up at the sky again. For a long moment, she just stood there. Then she whispered something Daniel barely heard. I hope he forgives me. Daniel's heart skipped. Forgives her? For what? Emily turned and slowly walked back toward the house. Daniel remained hidden until she disappeared inside. His mind was racing now. Something serious was happening. Something Emily clearly felt she couldn't tell him. But the biggest question of all still remained. What was written on that piece of paper? That night, long after Emily had fallen asleep, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. The moonlight slipped through the bedroom window. His thoughts refused to rest. Finally, around midnight, Daniel quietly slipped out of bed. He walked softly through the hallway, then outside. The cold night air hit his face. He crossed the pasture alone. The corral stood silent under the stars. The cattle barely reacted when he entered. Daniel walked directly to the spot where Emily usually sat. He looked around the ground, carefully. Dust, footprints, straw, then something caught his eye. Near the fence, partially hidden under a loose wooden board, was something small, a folded piece of paper. Daniel slowly picked it up. His hands felt strangely heavy. He unfolded it carefully. The moonlight illuminated the page just enough for him to read. And when Daniel saw what was written there, his heart dropped, because the words on the page made everything suddenly far more serious than he had ever imagined. The night was completely silent. Only the distant sound of crickets and the soft breathing of the cattle filled the air. Daniel stood alone inside the corral, holding the folded piece of paper in his hand. The moonlight was just strong enough to illuminate the page. For a moment, he hesitated. A strange feeling grew in his chest. Part of him knew that once he read those words, things would never feel the same again. He slowly unfolded the paper. The page was worn, the edges slightly bent, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times before. Daniel began reading. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Emily's. The letter started simply, "Dear Daisy." Daniel frowned. Daisy? He looked up slowly at the brown cow standing a few feet away. The animal calmly chewed its hay, unaware that it had just been addressed in a letter. Daniel looked back down at the paper. His voice trembled slightly as he continued reading silently. I know this might sound strange to anyone else, but you've been part of this family for many years. Daniel's eyes moved across the page. Long before Daniel and I finally had enough money to save the ranch, you were here. The memories began returning to him. Daisy, of course. She had been one of the first cows they ever bought. That had been almost 12 years ago. Back when things were difficult. Back when the ranch had nearly failed. Daniel kept reading. I remember the year of the drought. We thought we were going to lose everything. Daniel's throat tightened slightly. He remembered that year clearly. The grass had died. The wells had nearly run dry. They had been days away from selling the ranch just to survive. Emily's writing continued. But you kept giving milk. Every single day. Enough for us to sell. Enough for us to survive. Daniel slowly lowered the paper. His eyes moved again toward the brown cow. Daisy, the same cow Emily had hugged every night. He looked back at the letter. I know you're just an animal, but sometimes I think you understood us better than most people ever could. Daniel swallowed. His chest felt heavier now. He continued reading. You were there when things were hard. You were there when we finally started getting back on our feet. And you were there the day we found out we were finally going to have our first child. Daniel's breath stopped. His eyes froze on the page. Their first child. Emily had been pregnant once, many years ago. But the pregnancy hadn't lasted. It had been the hardest time of their marriage. Emily had never spoken much about it afterward. Daniel slowly sat down on the wooden rail of the corral fence. He kept reading. I remember sitting out here after we lost the baby. I thought my heart would never heal, and somehow you stayed beside me that night. Daniel's vision blurred slightly. Emily had never told him that. He had assumed she had stayed inside the house during those nights. But according to the letter, she had been here, in the corral, with Daisy. Daniel looked up again. The cow lifted its head slowly and stared back at him with calm eyes, almost the same way it had stared at Emily. Daniel returned his attention to the letter. Emily's handwriting grew slightly shakier near the bottom of the page. And now, after all these years, they say we might have to sell the ranch. Daniel's heart dropped. Sell the ranch? No, that couldn't be right. He read faster now. The bank called today. They gave us 2 months. After that, if we can't pay the debt, the ranch is gone. Daniel's mind spun. Debt. He had no idea the situation had gotten that serious. Emily had handled most of the paperwork over the last year, while Daniel focused on the cattle and repairs. He had trusted her completely, but apparently things were worse than he realized. The letter continued. And if we lose the ranch, we'll have to sell the cattle too. Daniel felt something tighten painfully inside his chest. Daisy would be sold, probably sent to a livestock auction, maybe even a slaughterhouse. Emily's last words on the page were written slower, as if she had struggled to write them. I just wanted to say thank you for helping us survive when we needed it most. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you the way you protected us. Daniel lowered the letter slowly. The quiet of the corral surrounded him. The cattle shifted softly in the straw, and Daisy stood there calmly, unaware of the future waiting for her. Daniel felt a deep weight pressing down on him. Emily hadn't been hiding an affair. She hadn't been hiding a secret relationship. She had been coming out here every night to say goodbye to one of the animals that had helped save their lives years ago. Daniel looked down at the letter again, then at Daisy, then across the wide fields of the ranch he had spent his entire life building. For the first time in many years, Daniel Carter realized something terrifying. He might be about to lose everything, and Emily had been carrying that burden alone. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He stayed outside in the corral for a long time, sitting on the wooden fence with the letter still in his hands. The moon slowly crossed the sky above the ranch. The cattle shifted quietly around him, and Daisy stood nearby, calm, patient, just like she always had been. Daniel read the letter again, then again. Each time the words felt heavier. Emily had been carrying this burden alone all this time. Eventually the sky began to brighten. The first light of morning slowly touched the fields. Daniel finally stood up. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. Then he walked back toward the house. The ranch looked peaceful in the early morning light. The same ranch that might soon belong to someone else. When Daniel stepped inside, Emily was already awake. She stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee. She looked up and smiled gently. "Morning," she said. Daniel studied her face. There were dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept well either. "Morning," he replied quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air felt different, heavier. Emily handed him a cup of coffee. Their fingers briefly touched. Then Daniel slowly reached into his pocket. He placed the folded letter on the kitchen table. Emily's smile disappeared immediately. Her eyes locked onto the paper. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered softly, "You found it?" Daniel nodded. "In the corral." Emily closed her eyes for a moment. A deep breath left her lungs. "I was going to throw it away," she said quietly, "but I never could." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down. Emily remained standing. Her hands rested on the counter behind her, gripping the edge slightly. "You should have told me," Daniel said gently. Her eyes filled with tears. Almost instantly, "I didn't want to worry you." Daniel looked at her carefully. "Emily, losing the ranch worries me a lot more than knowing the truth." The tears began rolling down her cheeks now. She wiped them away quickly. "I tried to fix it," she said. "I really did." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" Emily looked down at the table. Her voice was quieter now. "Last year, when the storm destroyed the north barn." Daniel nodded. He remembered that storm. It had caused serious damage. "We didn't have enough savings to repair everything," she continued. "So I took a loan." Daniel's expression tightened slightly. "A big one." Emily nodded slowly. "I thought the milk sales and cattle sales would cover it. But then the feed prices doubled, and the drought reduced production." Daniel exhaled slowly. The pieces began falling into place. "And the bank?" he asked. Emily swallowed. "They gave us a deadline." "How long?" Emily hesitated, then answered quietly, 2 months." Daniel leaned back in his chair. 2 months? That wasn't much time. Not nearly enough. Emily wiped her eyes again. "I didn't tell you because I thought I could solve it first." She looked up at him, but I couldn't. Her voice broke slightly. "And when I realized we might lose the ranch," she paused, "I started going to the corral at night." Daniel knew the rest. "To say goodbye," he said softly. Emily nodded. "To Daisy." Silence filled the kitchen. Outside, the morning sun rose slowly over the fields. After a moment, Daniel asked something that had been on his mind since the night before. "Why, Daisy?" Emily gave a small, sad smile. "You remember the drought year?" Daniel nodded. "Of course." Emily looked out the window toward the pasture. "She kept producing milk when the others didn't. That milk paid our bills. It kept us from losing the ranch the first time." Daniel looked down at the letter again. "So you felt like you owed her?" Emily nodded slowly. "She helped save our lives, and now I might have to sell her." Her voice cracked again. "I just wanted to thank her first." Daniel felt something deep shift inside his chest. For years, he had believed that ranching was mostly about numbers, land, cattle, profit, loss. But to Emily, it had always been about something more. Connection, loyalty, gratitude. Daniel stood up slowly. He walked over to the window. The ranch stretched endlessly outside. Fields, fences, barns, cattle grazing quietly in the morning light. Everything he had worked for his entire life, everything they had built together. Behind him, Emily whispered quietly, "I'm sorry." Daniel turned back toward her. "For what?" he asked. "For failing." Daniel walked closer to her. "You didn't fail." Emily shook her head. "I did. If we lose the ranch," Daniel gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "We're not losing it yet." Emily looked up at him. There was still sadness in her eyes, but now there was also a small spark of hope. "2 months isn't much time," she said. Daniel nodded. "No." Then he smiled slightly. "But it's still time." Emily frowned slightly. "What are you thinking?" Daniel looked out at the pasture again. His eyes stopped on Daisy, standing among the other cattle. A thought had begun forming in his mind. A crazy idea. Risky. But maybe, just maybe, enough to save everything. Daniel turned back toward Emily. "Maybe it's time the ranch gave something back." Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Daniel smiled slightly again. "I think I just had an idea." Emily stared at Daniel. "I think I just had an idea," he had said, but he hadn't explained it yet. The kitchen remained quiet for a moment. Outside, the sun had fully risen over the ranch. Golden light stretched across the fields. Emily crossed her arms slightly. "Daniel," she said softly, "what kind of idea?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window again. He looked out across the pasture. The cattle were slowly spreading across the grass. Among them, Daisy. She stood calmly near the fence. Daniel watched her for several seconds. Then he spoke. "You said Daisy helped save this ranch once." Emily nodded slowly. "She did." Daniel turned toward her. "Then maybe she can help save it again." Emily frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Daniel walked back to the table and picked up the letter. He looked at it for a moment before speaking again. "You know something interesting about people?" Emily waited. "They love stories." He placed the letter back down. "Real stories." Emily tilted her head slightly. "What does that have to do with Daisy?" Daniel smiled faintly. "What if people knew her story?" Emily blinked. "What?" Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down again. "Think about it." He leaned forward slightly. "This ranch almost failed years ago." Emily nodded slowly. "And one cow helped keep it alive." Emily looked confused. "Yes, but—" "And now," Daniel continued, "the ranch might disappear again." Emily's eyes narrowed slightly as she tried to follow his thinking. Daniel continued, "What if people heard that story? What if people saw Daisy? What if they understood what she means to this ranch?" Emily shook her head. "Daniel, people don't care about one cow." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Some people don't." Then he smiled slightly. "But a lot of people do." Emily looked uncertain. "You really think strangers would care about something like that?" Daniel shrugged. "Maybe." Then he added something surprising. "Or maybe millions would." Emily stared at him. "Millions?" Daniel nodded. "Have you seen how many people watch stories online these days?" Emily hesitated. I don't really use the internet much. Daniel chuckled softly. Well, trust me. He pointed toward Daisy outside the window. That cow has a better story than most movies. Emily looked outside again. Daisy calmly flicked her tail as she walked through the grass, still completely unaware of the conversation happening about her. Emily looked back at Daniel. So what are you suggesting? Daniel leaned forward again. We tell the story. Emily frowned slightly. To who? Daniel smiled. To everyone. Emily blinked. You mean the internet? Daniel nodded. We record Daisy. We tell the story of the drought. We tell the story about how she helped save the ranch. Emily was quiet now, thinking. Daniel continued, and we tell the truth. What truth? Daniel looked at her gently. That we might lose everything. Emily's expression softened. You want to tell the whole world we're about to lose the ranch? Daniel nodded. Why not? Emily shook her head slowly. That sounds embarrassing. Daniel smiled kindly. Maybe? Then he added something important. But honesty connects people. Emily leaned against the counter again, still unsure. And what exactly do you expect to happen? Daniel shrugged again. I don't know. Emily crossed her arms. That's not very reassuring. Daniel laughed softly. No, it isn't. Then his voice became calmer. But doing nothing guarantees we lose the ranch. Emily looked down at the floor. She knew he was right. Silence filled the kitchen again. Finally, she looked back up. What would we even say? Daniel picked up the letter again. He unfolded it. We start with this. Emily's eyes widened slightly. My letter? Daniel nodded. It's perfect. Emily shook her head quickly. No way. Daniel smiled. Why not? It's too personal. That's exactly why it works. Emily looked nervous. What if people laugh? Daniel shrugged again. Then at least we tried. Emily slowly walked toward the window. She watched Daisy again. The cow moved slowly across the field. Peaceful, simple, honest. After a long moment, Emily spoke quietly. You really think Daisy could save the ranch again? Daniel walked beside her. He watched the pasture with her. I don't know, he admitted. Then he added with a small smile. But I do know something. Emily glanced at him. What? Daniel looked toward the barn. We've got an old camera somewhere in that storage room. Emily stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. All right, she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. All right? Emily nodded. Let's tell Daisy's story. Daniel felt something warm spread through his chest. Hope, real hope. Because sometimes the most powerful stories in the world start in the quietest places, like a small ranch and one very special cow. Later that afternoon, Daniel pushed open the door of the old storage shed. Dust floated in the air as sunlight slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls. Emily followed behind him. This place hasn't been cleaned in years, she said, waving dust away from her face. Daniel laughed softly. Welcome to my organization system. He began moving old tools, ropes, and boxes, stacked on top of each other. Somewhere in that mess was the old camera. After a few minutes of searching, he suddenly stopped. There it is. Emily stepped closer. Daniel pulled out a small black camera covered in dust. He wiped the lens with his shirt. You think it still works? Emily asked. Daniel pressed the power button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the small screen lit up. Emily smiled. Well, I'll be. Daniel chuckled. Still alive. Emily crossed her arms playfully, just like Daisy. Daniel grabbed a small tripod from the shelf. Let's go. A few minutes later, they were walking toward the pasture. The afternoon sun painted the ranch in warm colors. Daisy stood near the fence again. She looked up as Daniel and Emily approached. "Well," Daniel said quietly, "time to make you famous." Emily laughed nervously. "I still can't believe we're doing this." Daniel set up the tripod near the fence. He adjusted the camera angle carefully. Daisy slowly walked closer, almost as if she was curious. "Perfect," Daniel said. Emily looked unsure. "What exactly are we supposed to say?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Just tell the truth." Emily took a deep breath. Daniel pressed the record button. The small red light appeared. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Emily looked directly at the camera. Her voice was slightly nervous. "Hello?" She hesitated. Daniel whispered softly. "Just talk." Emily nodded. "Hello. My name is Emily." She glanced at Daisy beside her. "And this is Daisy." The cow flicked her ear and looked toward the camera. Emily continued. "She probably looks like an ordinary cow to most people. But to us, she's much more than that." Daniel stayed silent behind the camera. Emily slowly relaxed as she spoke. "Years ago, our ranch almost failed." She gestured toward the fields behind her. "We had a terrible drought. Most of our cattle stopped producing milk." Emily gently placed her hand on Daisy's neck. But Daisy didn't. Daniel zoomed the camera slightly closer. Emily's voice grew softer. "Her milk helped us survive. It helped us keep this ranch." She looked down for a moment, then back at the camera. "But now, we might lose everything again." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest hearing those words spoken out loud. Emily continued. "The bank gave us 2 months. If we can't pay our debt, this ranch will belong to someone else." The wind moved softly across the grass. Emily gently hugged Daisy again. "So tonight, we just wanted to say thank you." Her voice trembled slightly. "To the animal that helped save our lives." Emily looked at the camera one last time. "Her name is Daisy, and she's part of this family." Daniel stopped recording. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily wiped her eyes. That felt strange. Daniel checked the footage. It felt honest. Emily looked nervous again. "So, what now?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Now we post it." That evening, they sat together in the living room. Daniel connected the camera to his old laptop. The internet on the ranch was slow, very slow. Uploading the video took almost an hour. Emily sat beside him, watching the loading bar move painfully slowly. "This is ridiculous," she said. Daniel laughed. "Welcome to Country Internet." Finally, the upload finished. The video was now online. Emily looked at the screen. "That's it?" Daniel nodded. "That's it." Emily leaned back in the couch. "So what happens now?" Daniel shrugged. "Now we wait." The night passed quietly. The ranch looked exactly the same as it always had. The cattle slept. The wind moved through the grass, and somewhere out in the vast world, their video began its journey. At first, only a few people saw it. 10 views, 20 views, 30. Emily checked the numbers once before going to bed. 42 views, she said. Daniel smiled. "Well, it's a start." Emily laughed softly. "I guess." They turned off the lights and went to sleep. But during the night, something unexpected started to happen. Somewhere in another city, a stranger watched their video, then shared it. Then another person shared it, and another. By morning, the number of views had grown far beyond anything Daniel and Emily could have imagined. The sunlight slowly filled the small farmhouse kitchen. Daniel woke up earlier than usual. For a moment, everything felt normal. the quiet countryside, the distant sound of cows in the cattle corral, and the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen. Then he remembered the video. Last night, he and Emily had uploaded it. Just a simple video. Nothing fancy. No special editing. Just a moment from their life on the farm. Daniel sat down in front of the computer and opened the website. He expected to see maybe a few views, maybe 20, maybe 50, if they were lucky. The page loaded. Daniel blinked, then leaned closer to the screen. Wait, what? The number showed 3,182 views. His eyebrows lifted. That can't be right. He refreshed the page. The number jumped. 5,197 views. Daniel laughed nervously. Okay, that's weird. He refreshed again. 8,000 views. Now, his heart started beating faster. "Emily," he called. From the kitchen she answered. "What's wrong?" "You need to see this." Emily walked into the room holding 2 cups of coffee. What happened? Daniel slowly pointed at the screen. Emily leaned closer. Her eyes widened. "Daniel, is that real?" He refreshed the page again. The number changed instantly. 12,940 views. Comments began appearing one after another. People saying the video made them smile. People saying it made them cry. Some said it reminded them of their own families. Others simply wrote, "Thank you for sharing this." Emily slowly sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. They just watched the number continue to climb. 15,000, 19,000, 23,000. Daniel leaned back in his chair, completely stunned. "Well," he smiled softly, "I guess people really needed to see something like this." Emily looked at the screen, then at Daniel. Her eyes were shining. Maybe the world needed a little bit of hope. Outside, the sun rose over the quiet farm. The cattle moved slowly in the corral. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. But for Daniel and Emily, something had changed. Their small moment, their simple story, had just reached thousands of people around the world, and neither of them could have imagined it. Daniel refreshed the page one more time. The number kept climbing, higher and higher and higher. He looked at Emily and smiled. "Well, I think this is just the beginning."